Hello. It's being live streamed, but not zoomed. Yeah, so you can't see them, but they can see you. I know. Just those two black cameras back there on the shelf. But the link is still on the calendar for it. Right, yeah. We'll get started in a moment, but maybe we'll have folks, as you're coming in, maybe if folks could just move in a little bit. I know everyone's spread out, so we'll want to kind of focus the energy. So maybe kind of bring the chairs more to the center if you could, your own chair, and then as more people come in, we'll fill in. We'll just make a circle closer to us.
You'll be able to hear the shofar better.
Yeah, hear the shofar, and we'll make like a circle, Harriet, so yeah. You don't need to bring other chairs, just your own. Just your own. Die, 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 die. Hi, die, 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 die. Hi, ya, da, die, die. Hi, ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 da, da, ay, 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 da, All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to VJ. Welcome to those who are on the stream. Wave to them. My name, as many of you know, is Rabbi Sammy Kanter. This is John Silver. And we're excited to be here with you tonight for sacred sounds, the shofar's call of Elul. So I'll pass it over to John.
So I know we started with the melody of Achad Sha'alti, and Rabbi Sheila Peltz-Weinberg, who is one of the founders for the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, has a very wonderful interpretation of that line. It said, I seek only one thing alone, to connect to this moment, nowhere else, only this, nothing less, my palace and time. So I invite us for this session on the shofar to just focus on just this moment and what is arising in this moment. And what's the kavanah behind today is for many of us, like the quintessential moment of Rosh Hashanah is the sounding of the shofar. And many people, maybe not you, but some people like plan when they're going to come to synagogue to make sure that they're there for the sounding of the shofar. And then maybe somebody's saving your seats for just the right time. Maybe they're not that annoyed that they've been saving the seats for that long. And then the rabbi says some words of wisdom, and then it's over. And you may think, that was amazing, it was better last year, this is how long it was, this is how short it was. But the concern, and I'm doing this like from my own experience, even for somebody who's been sounding the shofar, is how often are we present actually when the shofar is sounded during Rosh Hashanah? And so the kavanah, the purpose of this, is to prepare us during Elul, where you sound the shofar every day, to listen to and hear the sounds of the shofar and what it brings up in us when it is sounded. So it's not just a moment in the service that comes and that goes, but that we are personally prepared to be present when the shofar is sounded and be able to witness what arises in us as far as feelings, emotions, thoughts, whatever happens. Because often words don't suffice, so we go to music. And sometimes music doesn't suffice, so we go to niguns. But it's the raw sounding of the shofar that sometimes can just like pierce our kishkas. Right? It's that wordless, primal sound of the shofar. So what I would like to do, just to start us off, is to sound the shofar. So as you know, there are 4 sounds of the shofar. I'm going to sound 3 of them. Tekiyah, which is the single sound. Shvarim, 3 sounds. Truah, 9 sounds, and then another Tekiyah, and then there's the Tekiyah Gedolah, which maybe we'll do at the very end. And I'm going to sound it. I won't even tell you what I'm trying to portray when I'm sounding that. We'll do that later. But what I ask is for you to just listen and sit and see what arises. Whether it's memories of past services, whether you're with your grandparents or your parents or whatever, or it's jarring, or it's piercing, or it's scary, or it's awakening, or it's sad, whatever it is, just be willing to sit with it without judgment, without a story, as Rabbi Marcella Bronstein would often say, and just see what arises. So before I do that, I just ask for you to sit and just take a couple of moments just to be with your breath and just to witness what's going on inside you now. And you can focus on your breath, just breathing in and breathing out. Be aware of any thoughts you're having, any feelings, sensations, emotions, residuals of what's been happening. And just be aware. I've learned from doing this, I always have to tell people I'm about to sound the shofar. You can't do it when people's eyes are closed. It's not fair. So you may open your eyes if you're comfortable, and I'll just sound those few notes. And then afterwards, there's silence. There's a pause, and just see what arises. Maybe you notice changes in your breath. Maybe you notice changes in your heart rate. Notice your thoughts, your sensations. If your eyes are closed, whenever you're comfortable, open up your eyes. Just take what that experience was, which may be different than when you've heard the sound of the shofar before.
So, thank you, John, to go into, to begin and open. John opened, but to come, the next step of our opening is, I'd just like to invite you to share with us, with this room, and I guess those who are with us online, how did you hear the shofar in this moment? Where you are this year, this evening, this month, this point in your life. How did, as John guided us through the shofar and meditation with it, how did you hear the shofar? And I'm just going to invite you, I'll pass around the mic as we do it. It doesn't amplify, but it's our folks from afar, our BJ members from afar, and those can hear what we're saying. We'll just pass it around as if they're in the room with us. So if you'd like to share, I invite you to share your name and how is the shofar meeting you at this moment. Someone want to go first? Anyone? No brave takers? Oh, all right.
We did it this morning for the first time since last year. It was part of the service. You knew it was coming. Everything was going to Hoyle. But when you're sitting here and you don't expect it, and you hear it, it's a different shofar, it's a different sound. It's not, oh, here comes the shofar, it's part of the service, it's announced. It really makes a very big difference when you experience it and not just hear it, or not just be there because it's coming, and then, look, breakfast, gotta go. So, not that you have us all captured here, but it does make a very big difference to experience it as opposed to hearing it. And that's what I got out of just what you did now. Because when we did it this morning, it was two of us, we got up, Felicia said, and here we go. And everybody said, yay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And your name?
I'm Steve.
Steve. All right, thank
And
you.
Steve is one of our shofar blowers at BJ for years.
Someone else. Harriet.
Thank you, Steve.
So it wasn't the first time I heard it this year because John blew it the other night in Havara on Zoom. And it sounded so different tonight. It was so much louder and resonant and calling than the other night, although it was wonderful to hear it on Zoom for the first time. It was completely different tonight.
What was different about it?
I think maybe I feel more present because I'm in the room with John instead of just looking at him on my computer screen.
Yeah. Thanks. You want to say something? No? Anyone else want to share how this met you this year?
It's Harry here. I don't know how to focus into the question. I spoke to John before, and he likes the loud, sharp sound, and I like the mellow, soft, wooden sound. So when I first heard it this year, it was brash, it was noisy, it was super irritating. And related to when I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock, from a restless sleep and odd dreams, and I wake up knowing that I really shouldn't be sleeping. I had left too many things undone, and I started to go into a panic that all the things in my life would come down on me, and it's sometimes difficult to go back to sleep like that, which does tie it to the traditional themes of the holiday. We are hearing the sound of the shofar to remind us of the holiday and to know that time is going quickly, in case you want to get written in the book, for another year, and a loud, disturbing, alarming sound really fits that pattern quite well. But I'd still, personally, I get a joy out of a restfulness out of the sound of the soft sound, like a mountain horn, so bellowing through valleys and whatnot. So it's not exactly an answer to your question, but that's how I respond.
Yeah.
And you can build from there.
You wanted to share and just say your name, please?
So my initial reaction is it makes me feel connected to thousands of years of Jews who have listened to this very exact same sound and led them to feel all kinds of things. And I guess normally when I hear this shofar, to me it's a sound of hope. It signifies growth, change, awareness of what you want to change from the past. But I feel, hearing it this year, I feel incredible sadness because of what's going on in Israel and how things are going, and I'm hoping thousands of years from now this will just be a sad time in our history that we've made it through. My name, Rhonda.
Thank you all for starting with that. And I want to share with you all, and John, I'll share with you, I have to say, I was expecting it, not only because we had talked about this and planned it, then you gave us the warning, and maybe I'm not usually so close to a shofar, but I had my eyes closed, and I felt this like vibration in my whole body, because it was loud, it was sharp, it was right here, and that alerted me and like kind of shook me up in a way that I think usually the shofar doesn't. Sure, it does awaken something in me, and I always find it moving as like a spiritual call and all that we'll talk about tonight that goes with it. But there was like a real shaking that the sound, and again, it was right here, that kind of like I felt it in my heart. I felt it like, it was kind of like, I almost felt uncomfortable by the whole vibration. So I just wanted to share that with you all as another thing on my mind. So we're going to get into our learning, but before we get too far, I just want to mention I'd like to dedicate the learning tonight, kind of, Rhonda, as you mentioned. I'd like to dedicate the learning to the 6 hostages who were murdered on Saturday. And as we all know, there's been tremendous loss in Israel, tremendous loss in Gaza. It's been a terrible year in many regards. But the way these folks died, I'm finding particularly heartbreaking, and also is shattering my insides, like the shofar. So I want to dedicate our learning to Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Carmel Gott, Alexander Lobanov, Almog Sanusi, Eden Yerushalmi, and Ori Danamo. May their memories forever be for a blessing. May their neshamas, their soul, have an aliyah. May they rise up to the highest heights in heaven, and may our learning tonight in this space help them get there. So I'm going to turn it over to John, who is going to talk a little bit about, you already spoke about why we're here, but talk a little bit more about how you came to sound the shofar every year here at BJ and in your life, what the shofar means to you this year, and go on from there.
Sure, thanks. So for those of us of a certain age, you may remember Barton's Candy. And they had a plastic shofar that they filled with candy. And in the plastic shofar was a little tweeter. I took the tweeter out, and I learned to sound the shofar on a plastic Barton's Candy shofar. That's how I learned. And then when I was 12 years old, my grandfather, I think it was 12, it could have been 11, my grandfather brought me this shofar from Israel. I never played, this is the only wind instrument I play. Some people play French horn, trumpet, whatever. This is the only, and I learned just because I was able to do it. And so I did it for junior congregation. When I went to college, I did it for college. And then I didn't do it for quite a number of years. And then it's unclear when it happened, maybe 1992 or something, that I believe I met with Marshall Meyer, and I asked whether I could sound the shofar. And BJ was different then. He said, sure. He didn't ask to hear me sound it. Like, can you imagine us doing this like without a tryout or anything? I said, sure. And my kavanah at that time, the reason I wanted to sound the shofar, and I confess this every year, is because I knew I was good at it. I knew I could do this really well. And it was 90%, maybe an underestimate, performative. And then I started to practice. My father died in Elul. His yard site is in a week or so. And I started to sound the shofar every year. I started practicing at morning minyan during Elul at his yard site. So it sort of got ingrained with that. And then on September 9th, 2001, Central Synagogue was rededicated. And Central Synagogue asked each synagogue to have a shofar blower there on their steps to rededicate it. So no one remembers what happened on September 9th, but I was the BJ shofar representative for that. But then what happened a few days afterwards, after 9/11, there was the high holidays, and I felt enormous pressure that I really had to do this well for the congregation. We needed this. And it didn't go so well. That kind of pressure, it was horrible. I felt devastated. And then one year, Rolly told me, with this shofar, it's an oblong mouthpiece. I had been sounding it this way. And Rolly said, it's supposed to be sounded up. And of course, Rolly's correct. But the mouthpiece is different this way and this way. And that made it also more difficult to sound the shofar, just so you know. And there was another year I had tremendous problems, and I think I told Rolly or Ari, if you don't want me to do it anymore, I understand. But a main turning point was in 2012, when the rabbis and Ari decided that all the shofar blowers should actually be taught something about the shofar. Should actually be taught about some of the writings in the Torah, some of the kavanot, and about how to sound the shofar, because most of us learn because we heard somebody else do it. And it was taught by Peter Geffen, Rabbi Peter Geffen, and his son Jonah, who's a Marshall Meyer Fellow at the time. And that was wonderful, because it's the first time I had teachings about the meaning of the shofar, that it's a connection between heaven and earth, that when it sounds 100 times, it's a secret language, all these things, it just made it so much more meaningful. And Peter said, actually some of the notes should be sounded differently. So no one mentioned, but I'll You'll hear it again for the Shvarim. I sound the Shvarim that it goes, da. It's a sigh. It's a cry. And that was a change because Peter said, it's crying. It should sound like a cry. And that like totally changed how I would sound, my intention when I was sounding the shofar. And then after Leah suggested, my daughter, that I get a shofar that was easier to sound, so I went to Levi Meisner in Borough Park. Then mindfulness started to become merged with the shofar, either going to Costa Rica, working with Rachel Cowan, we're sitting in the chapel named after her, actually doing a teaching, I think it was 2016, on Heshbon HaNefesh, about hearing the sound of the shofar. So my first teaching about the shofar was with Rachel. And Marcelo at the mindfulness service, shofar for the mindfulness service at that point was 4 notes with a pause. Tekiyah, Shvarim, Chua, Tekiyah, Golah. That was it. That was the whole shofar service. So you sat with the meaning of each sound. So I started becoming more aware of not just what sounding the shofar means, but what each sound could represent, like the words in a sentence, instead of looking at the whole paragraph. And then most transformative is Marcelo asked whether I'd give the kavanah for the shofar service for the mindfulness service. And while for several years I've been looking at the sheet that the Geffens gave me for the kavanah, this was the first time that I was able to share with the congregation what I was trying to say, what I was trying to transmit, what my kavanah was when I was sounding the shofar. And that became really like as or more important than sounding the shofar was having the congregation with me to know what was I trying to do when I was sounding the shofar. And so we're kind of at that point now. There's other times through Dorot, I would go to people's houses, homebound, who wanted to hear the shofar. And actually, before I sounded the shofar, or when I sounded the shofar, I'd say, well, what did it make you think about? What was the reaction that you had when I sounded the shofar? And Orly's father, my father-in-law, Max, I went to his house. And first he said, my mother, so Orly's grandmother, Sonia, said, I should always hear the shofar every year. And Max was the most grateful person you would ever meet. And he was a survivor of the Vilna Ghetto who escaped and was hid out in a hole in a Polish farmer's property for 10 and a half months. So I sounded the shofar, and I asked him what he thought, and he said what you said. It's the sound of hope. It's the sound of hope. Here's somebody who was a Holocaust survivor, and the shofar was the sound of hope. So, without going into the details of what each sound could mean, I think I've come so far in where I was, like in 2011. And fortunately, the shofar is very easy to sound, so I actually have no anxiety about whether I'm going to get a sound out of this, as opposed to the older shofar. But to be able to share with the congregation what I'm trying to transmit, and what happened one year is one of the congregants came and said, I could hear it was crying. This in the big service where I don't do the kavanah. So that even what I was trying to transmit came through. And Shuli Passow, who co-led one of those mindfulness services, said, I never thought what the shofar blower was feeling when he was sounding the shofar. And I said, shofar blowers have feelings too. So where am I this year? And this came before the events of last weekend. So my brother died 3 weeks ago today. And clearly, I'm in a place of brokenness. So for me, the shofar is a sound of brokenness. And whether you can add like hope and whatever with some of the other sounds, but the shvarim, tshuva, and the brokenness, and God is close to the brokenhearted, that's where I am this year.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So we're going to go into some text study. I'm going to just, oops. Take one and pass it around. So, oh. There might be a. And for those online, I think it should be. For those online, it should be posted. It should be posted on the YouTube. I think you can also, Joyce Gottlieb, who's our Gabbai for the Minyan, said you can go into the Zoom room on the Minyan, which is on the calendar if you'd like also, and she can send it to you as well, and maybe there'll be some folks in there. So what I wanted to do, as we heard from John about his intention coming into this year, I'd like to guide us in some study so we can think about our own intentions for hearing the shofar this year. I already started with an initial reaction, where are you when you hear the sounds? But our hope is in an hour, when we walk out of here, that each one of us will have a different sense of what our kavanah, or our intention, is for walking into Elul, walking into the Yamim Noraim, and hearing the shofar. So we are ready and we are open. We have the little warning that you gave us, John. That's what we're doing here tonight, because even though we might feel something different than we expected, we still, as Elul asks of us, we still need to do a little preparatory work so we can be open for that. So as you can see, John brought that first text from the Talmud, Tractate Rosh Hashanah. It's essential. He talked about his intent. It's essential that we have intent. We are going to look at two different texts, and I went back to Torah, the original, where it all comes from, and I wanted to look at where this idea of the shofar comes from and appears. I was very interested because even though Rosh Hashanah is not mentioned specifically in the Torah, it's mentioned as a day before the Day of Atonement where the shofar is blown, right? It's mentioned as a day of remembrance, and it's also, which is a kind of whole thing that we could unpack in a different class of what that means, but it's also mentioned that the shofar is blown. And so let's see where this comes from. So I'd like to invite you for about 10 minutes. We're going to break into to study groups with a chavruta, or a study partner. And so if you're online, you can either study with someone in your house or in the Zoom room, or just look for yourself. So what I'd like you to do is, if you look at our packet, there's a selection from Genesis 22:13. Now this is from the Akedah, the moment in the Torah when Abraham takes his son Isaac up the mountain. He's seemingly going to sacrifice Isaac as a part of what he sees as God's command. And then all of a sudden, a malach, an angel, or a messenger comes and stops him and is like, whoa, wait a second, what are you doing here? And Abraham's kind of thought he was following God's command. This is, again, a very this is the version of the story in my words. There's a lot to this story, and rabbis, as we know, for generations have mulled over it. And then we come to this pasuk, this verse in Genesis 22:13. And also, this Torah portion is what we read on Rosh Hashanah Day 2. So it's really tied into the holiday and the shofar. So what I would like you to do for 10 minutes with the chavruta is look at that, Genesis 22:13, and then look at there's a commentary by the Kli Yakar, a more mystic commentator, that is there. It goes all the way through to page, like the third page. It's on the back. So I invite you to read the pasuk with your partner, read the Kli Yakar's commentary, and start to wrestle with, like, what is his commentary and the midrash that he brings in, what is it trying to tell us about what the shofar's resonance is for Rosh Hashanah? Okay, so you're just looking at, with this commentary, what does it teach us? What might it point us to about the shofar in Rosh Hashanah? So again, 10 minutes, just find the person next to you, the first two texts on our sheet. Make sure to introduce yourself. Maybe the two in the back, if you'd like to be together. Great.
When the shofar is blown in a town, do the people not take alarm? It's not
Right,
no.
you're all turning this.
Let's discuss this, because we'll also do this part, and then this is the second teaching. Right. This one. So let's do the discussion, and we'll decide what the problem is, and then we'll start. Why do you do this on the second day?
We're not ready. Maybe we're not ready. No, I was putting a brush on that. It's also going to feel like we're not ready on the first day. We're really feel not the intensity of shofar, but the intensity. I mean, the fact that we read that was intense. And I think Kli Yakar is an interesting thing that
Takes a whole day to prepare.
right. And there's some interesting parallels.
Somebody who knows
I'll try.
So why did you do this?
So like, I thought it was particularly powerful that the ram is that man for us, and then the ram is coming to bring us into a higher, like real more. Start to wrap up your conversations and your thoughts. All right, it sounds like we were having good conversations. I could hear a buzz in the room. So I'm curious, after reading the Kliyakar, just some initial reactions to this take. Wow. Do you want to share with us?
Oh, microphone. Don't say anything yet.
Accommodate our friends online.
I think we were a little surprised to think about. It seemed to us maybe that the sin in the Akedah was God's sin. Sort of, creating an atmosphere for Abraham to do something evil for which he needed to be absolved, and that the ram came because Abraham did something evil because God told him to. So God, I think, might have some responsibility. Anna?
So God might have some responsibility, and I'll use this one. But how does that? And so how does that tie into kind of then with the ram? Like, where do you see the ram playing a part in this responsibility?
Well, God sending the ram in place. I think it felt a little confusing that, God caused this to happen.
Mm-hmm.
God instructed Abraham to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then God had to send a way to not just keep Abraham from doing it, but to absolve Abraham of his sin of doing it.
All right, to absolve Abraham of his sin of doing it. Thank you. Here, I appreciate you starting us off. It is interesting. I mean, the Akedah is so rich with a lot, and we're just pulling out one part of it. I feel like often the discussion is around Abraham and his decision and God and how it plays into it, and that's what Harry is picking up on. But there's also just something curious here that then this ram is there, and this ram is caught in the thicket, and then Abraham offers the ram up in place, sacrifices the ram in its place. And there's something there. I'm curious if anyone else has reactions from the Kliyakar's thoughts. Yeah, Orly?
Rhonda and I were speaking about that passage, about the ram's horns, and about in the end they will be redeemed by the ram's horns. And so one of the things that we spoke about is like, it's almost like tashlich, the transferring of the sins to something else. That this was an opportunity for Abraham to transfer his potential sin, guilt, to something else. And that feels a lot like what happens in parts of the holidays, where we reflect on our sins, we transfer our sins, we get rid of them in some way.
Great, thank you. So if we're going along with this idea that Abraham's doing something wrong in this story, then maybe Abraham's transferring his sins onto the ram, which, as we know, comes up, it's reminiscent of Tashlich, as you said, but it comes up later in Vayikra and Leviticus about what it means to kind of cast your sins away on a ram as well. So I'm just curious, if can you summarize then I'll go back to you, Harry. What is the Kliyakar saying? So there's a few different pieces in the Kliyakar's text, in his commentary on this pasuk. So what are the maybe two or three things that let's go back into a summary first, and then we'll kind of go into the interpretation. What might he be saying? Any takers? There's so much to unpack. Oh, okay. Well, I just want to, because first I asked for reactions, but I'm actually curious because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm curious, like, what are just the pashat, like the simple reading of what the Kliyakar is saying? What is he saying? Okay, so he's saying the verse is speaking about a sin. Thank you. A sinner. So it says on the first page, the matter of it being caught in the thicket, the ram meaning a tree, is a hint that so too is a sinner entangled in sin. Okay, so that's one piece. Thank you, Harriet. So a sinner is entangled in sin, like the ram was entangled. Then what's he saying next?
He's bringing it back to the beginning, the creation, the tree of knowledge.
And bringing in the tree of knowledge, so which is the cause of all sin. Yeah, so, but then a few lines down, I just want to pick up. So then I found interesting, he says, it is as if it is said that a person is ensnared and caught in a trap because his horns are the horns of a ram. So that's another thing. Sinning maybe is like being caught in a trap. That's another thing that he's saying. And then there's kind of a different turn, and there's a midrash that comes in that's commenting on the word after ayal in the text. It says, Hine ayal achar. Here is like, the Kliyakar says, and behold, a ram after. So what is this after? What is this achar? And what is the text saying about what this achar might say also about the ram?
Isn't it saying that the ram comes to redeem Israel, and yet they're still sinner. Israel's still sinning. After doesn't mean it's gone. It's not absolved and vanished. It's still like all of us. You can be forgiven for your sins. You can be absolved of your sins, but you are not without sin.
Right. So Israel, thank you, Harriet. So Israel's not without sin. And so now, and then it says, but this is about halfway down, but in the end, they will be redeemed by the ram's horn. Right? There's like kind of contradictory things here.
Right.
First, what's that?
Is that paradoxical? I mean,
Paradoxical.
the ram's horn represents a sin, but it also represents the absolution of the sin.
All right. Thank you. The ram's horn, this is fascinating, I think. The Kliyakar saying the ram's horn represents the sin, but then also it's how you get redeemed or atone for that sin. And then I'll just want to highlight one more line, and then we'll unpack this again. And this kind of sums up what was your name? Adam, what Adam was saying. This is on the page 3. And through it, Israel is redeemed from the hands of their evil impulse, the trap of which is cast over living. So through this ram's horn, you're redeemed, as Adam said. And then the Kliyakar says right before that, and that's why we have the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Or it makes sense that it's on Rosh Hashanah. So what does this mean? How can we be redeemed by the thing that also represents the sin and being entangled in sinning? How does that make sense?
It's transformed.
It's transformed.
Like
Do you want to say more?
Transformed. I'm not sure. I'll follow that up.
The horn, you said?
Well, the ram's horn is it's symbolic of one thing initially, but the symbolism gets transformed into the opposite of what it represented initially.
Yeah. So the symbol is one thing initially, and then you said it transformed. It's something different, maybe in the end. And Harry, do you want to?
This might be a little more existential, but if the initial horn which leads to the, if the initial horn which leads to the entanglement is essentially found to be human frailty of some sort, not the sin itself, but the frailty in human beings that led to being entangled, that taking from that whole mess of things, the horn itself, and manipulating it, hollowing it out, turning it into an instrument, and using human energy to take that aspect of humanity to be the thing that would be the plea for justice, for forgiveness, for whatever else. Because I'm no longer stuck. I still have my humanity, but I'm no longer stuck in the snares. I've turned it into, essentially, if it's music, it's praise of God.
Beautiful,
Which is
Harry.
what we're commanded to do.
Beautiful.
Make
Thank
music.
you. Well, and it also is reminiscent to me of this ram's horn here. If you went out on the street and showed someone that ram's horn, they probably wouldn't know what can come out of it, right? They wouldn't know not only the sound that can come out of it, but the different sounds and different rhythms that then come out of it, and that it happens in this space and it happens on this day, and then that horn lying on the ground that John brought here can transform our souls into be ready for tshuva, to be open to the divine. Like that little thing can open up so much. So maybe that's part of this transformation that the Kliyakar is talking about. And why, maybe one reason why we take something such as that ram's horn there and bring it into our holy space on the holiest days of the year as the vehicle to lead us to tshuva and returning, and then maybe ultimately one day to redemption. And so I just want to, shoe got untied there. I just want to read the next text that I brought from the Talmud in Tractate Rosh Hashanah, which says, Amar Rabbi Avahu, he said, why does one sound a blast with a shofar made from a ram's horn on Rosh Hashanah? The Holy One, blessed be he, said, sound a blast before me with the shofar made from a ram's horn, so that I will remember for you the binding of Isaac, son of Abraham, in whose stead a ram was sacrificed. And I will ascribe it to you as if you had bound yourselves before me. So now here's a parallel, I think. Well, I'll just take it. What does that add into this conversation, that text, before I speak? You can read it again to see if it soaks in, but Tractate Rosh Hashanah is where we get the way we practice Rosh Hashanah really comes from the Mishnah and the Talmud, because, as I mentioned, there was little about it that was specifically in the Torah. So here the rabbis now have interpreted the Torah to help us understand how we can get nearer to God through Rosh Hashanah. So what might this text be saying? Yeah, Harry.
Where in context is, and God's, this is what God said, where in context does he say this? In the description of the creating of the holidays? Or?
No, well, yeah, I mean, I think it's I should have put the text there and I should have looked it up. But I believe it's, actually, I don't know. I don't want to call it out because I don't think, this isn't directly related to Torah, I don't believe. I think it could, sometimes the rabbis say that God said something that, you're not quite sure where it's from. I apologize for not getting the exact, looking that up.
No, I have a jumble in my mind, fairly much, between the blessing, I believe, that we say at Rosh Hashanah is on the listening, and the commandment is to hear the sounding of the shofar. It is not to sound the shofar.
Right.
It's the player or the listener, the player within the text of the Rosh Hashanah, the blessing is sort of invisible.
Yeah.
It's that, and he who plays or she who plays is really in the service of the congregation to make it possible for the congregation to be able to fulfill their requirement for the
Sure.
holiday, to hear, and then everything that implies, and it takes us back to another disposition on Shema.
Right. So yeah, thank you there's a parallel with Shema, this idea of hearing, and you're right, the language here is sound, even though I think it's kind of a command to a congregation to have someone sound. But what might it be, maybe one take on just the end, how the fact that we're bringing in, as we talked about, we're bringing in this ram's horn to this holiday and commanded to sound it as a part of it. The text is saying this is specifically a reminder of the Akedah, of this story where Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac and then sacrifice the ram instead. And that is the way of illustrating that one is you're bounding themselves to God. What does this kind of invoke or evoke in you?
Wondering what kind of noise, what kind of sound comes out of a ram which is caught, entangled, and snared.
Mm-hmm.
What's the nature of the animal's noise, and whether there's any connection somewhere between that which is sounded on the horn
Right.
and connected to the nature of the animal.
Yeah, thank you. So Harry's talking about what the sound that a ram might make ensnared and how that ties in. Maybe that, what's interesting, you made me think of, I wonder if maybe that sound is a divine sound. The malach, the messenger, or the angel that kind of says, stop to Abraham, like, what are you doing, essentially? Don't sacrifice Isaac. This is a total midrash by me, but if you notice a ram, I wonder what it is about Abraham. Maybe it's completely divine and you can't hear it, but maybe there's some way that was pointing to the ram in some capacity. The ram was evoking some noise, which is a part of this faith, is a part of this binding that God was doing. So by binding Isaac, Abraham's trying to bind Abraham's self to God, right, through God's faith. And so maybe there's something about this story that the ram is also part of the binding, and there's a connection there. Yeah, Stephen.
The question I have is, when you take the ram's horn off the ram,
Uh-huh.
you can't just blow it.
Uh-huh.
It takes a lot of effort to clean it. You have to, how did anybody know how to do that or why to do it?
Yeah.
Why that particular ram's horn?
Mm.
How did they know the effort that needed to go into sound it to make the ram's horn sound and shoot?
Yeah. Thank you.
The horn's nice and straight.
Right.
There must have been something of greater importance to make the effort to take a ram's horn, clean it out, and make a sound come out of it, because you just don't pick it up and blow it, and all of a sudden you got a sound.
Right. Thank you, Stephen. Wow.
Why a ram's horn?
Stephen, the great question. It's like, why a ram's horn? And just taking a horn off a ram doesn't make this transformation. There has to be a lot of work to clean it and maintain it and even practice and know how to blow it. And it's a lot of human work to maintain the ram's horn. Maybe that has to do with part of this. If we are going to, as the Kliyas said, transform the horn into a redeemer, it takes a lot of work by us, right? It takes a lot of identifying something, cleaning it, maintaining, holding it, just even recognizing it in some ways. So let's go on, because I want to be mindful of time, because John also wants to put another layer on the Akedah here. So, your mic here. So I'll toss it over to you.
Right, and this is something for those of you who participated last year with what Rolly Madelon and I did. In the Sephardic congregations, what is always said before the sounding of the shofar is this piyut called Et Sha'arei Ratzon. And it's about the binding of Isaac. And it's a very powerful piyut. And so I just have here two of the paragraphs that will give you a sense of the power of this piyut. And Rolly and I spent an hour. Well, he spent an hour. I just sounded the shofar. He spoke about the piyut. So this is Isaac speaking. Tell my mother that her joy has turned away. The son she gave birth to at 90 years of age has gone to the fire and has been designated for the knife. Where will I find a comforter for her? Where? It pains me for my mother to cry and sob. And this is the refrain of this piyut. Recall the binder, the bound, and the altar. My wilderness will reel in shock from the knife. Please sharpen it, Father, and my bonds strengthen and burn the fire in my flesh. Take with you that which remains from my ashes and tell Sarah, this is Isaac's perfume. Recall the binder, the bound, and the altar. And how often do we speak about like Isaac's pain, Isaac confronting his father about what he's doing, and how his mother is going to find out about this? I mean, they're midrash about this, I assume. And you know, right after this, in the next chapter in Bereshit, Sarah dies. Probably not a coincidence. But I think this is just so powerful about the crying and the sobbing that is associated with the shofar, and this is one of the reasons why this is chanted in the Sephardic congregations. So I just wanted to share this to you because it's interesting that until I read this book that said about this, like, I never knew it. Of course, Rolly knew about it. Oh yeah, I know that one. When I was at the shul with my grandfather, like in the Yemenite shul, yeah, they said that all the time. But like, did anybody ever hear about this piyut? It's in all the Sephardic synagogues. It's amazing. It's amazing. And it's just so beautiful.
We're going to transition into the next text, but just take a moment of kind of all that stirring about the shofar. We didn't land anywhere exactly, but the point is to stir it all up so we can kind of get to a kavanah.
Right.
So
Right. So with whatever kavanah you will take from those readings, and there are many possible ones between judgment, and I think the first is like from the tree of knowledge, becoming aware of what's happening. And, you know, even at the when a shofar is blown in a town, do the people not take alarm? So waking up, sobbing. So I'm going to sound the shofar again with whatever kavanah you want to bring to this, and just see what arises again. And now you're prepared with, it's not mellow. So.
let's transition into our next text. this text is the first time that the shofar appears in Torah. So as I said, the ram we talked about, it didn't say shofar. This is the first time we see the word shofar. And it's from Revelation. It's from the moment at Mount Sinai when the Israelites experience God and they get to meet God and have all of this whole tradition and all there is revealed to them. So would someone read from Exodus 19:16? Will you just read the text from Exodus for us?
On the third day, as morning dawned, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud upon the mountain and a very loud blast of the horn, and all the people who were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp toward God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was all in smoke, for Adonai had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain. Some Hebrew manuscripts and the Greek read, all the people trembled violently. The blare of the horn grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. I'm reading this, and then Adonai came down upon Mount Sinai on the top of the mountain, and Adonai called Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up.
So initial, maybe this is a familiar passage. A thank you to you, or at least this part in Torah is familiar. But this is the first time we see shofar. What does it evoke for you in this conversation? Vayhi kol hashofar holech lechazek me'od. Moshe yedaber Elohim ya'anenu lechol. The blare of the horn, the shofar, grew louder and louder. As Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. Yeah, Harry, I'll repeat what you said.
The shofar was God's voice.
The shofar was God's voice. I'm going to say more? That's simple. So the shofar, Harriet's read on this pursuit, but the shofar was God's voice. I mean, they are after all in the same. So
In every blast.
Beautiful. What else? Yeah, Elias.
Well, it says they trembled violently, and that struck me because when John first blew the shofar, it was actually the first time that it brought me fear. So, and I think it's because I was so close to John as he was blowing it, so I could relate. The Israelites, they were close to God.
Wow. It's a beautiful parallel there. Elias is saying that how the Israelites said trembled violently, the whole mountain or all the people, as some manuscripts might say. Elias, you're reflecting on. I mean, I also trembled, John. Like it was very intense. I've never had such an intense. I mean, I've never been sitting so close to a forceful shofar, but there was a trembling, and so I appreciate Elias. Now we're making this connection. Okay, like there's a trembling. Maybe it happened first, but maybe all at the same time. The horn is growing louder. The people are trembling, and the mountain is trembling. God's voice is in that noise. God's voice is there. God's answering in the horn.
I also want to share when I'm doing that,
Yeah.
my heart is, I just want to know after I sound it, my heart is pounding. I mean, my heart's going faster and my heart is pounding when I'm doing this.
And do you think what do you think is causing your heart to pound? I know the doctor's in the room.
No,
What do you
I know.
think? What do you think is causing your heart to pound when the shofar?
I think a lot of it is the amount of effort I'm putting into this. I mean, so I think I'm putting everything I have
It's
into
physical.
this.
Yeah. Wow.
It's also part of how you fill up the blow the shofar is to, wake them up in the rafters. You're not supposed to just blow, to get the sound out.
Mm-hmm.
When we help the kids blow, like family services and stuff, you want it to be loud. You want it to rattle into their cages. You want them to wake up. You want them to be in the moment, as opposed to, okay, I heard it and that's it. And so what you're experiencing is, at least the way I was taught, and the way we try to teach the younger kids, is to be loud, be forceful.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so it's a part of being taught the way you teach and we're taught is to be forceful and loud with the shofar, which kind of mirrors this in Revelation.
Also, I mean, I haven't shared this with many people, but for the other shofar, at the end of doing all the things, my lip actually is bleeding a little bit, and I have some blood on my talus from how hard I'm blowing.
Wow.
I mean, not with the new one, but with the old one.
So this is like real full power that you're like.
I mean, it's whatever I have. I mean,
Right. No, but I mean, it's interesting.
It's
And why I asked too is I was curious. I mean, I was curious if the beating of your heart comes from the act of you blowing it and the kind of the intensity it takes, or if it comes from the emotion
Or
or what you hear after, or if it comes from you being nervous. Like I was kind of curious.
I think all of the above.
It.
All
But
of
that's
the
why
above.
I asked,
All of the above.
because I was curious. Yeah,
All of the
Harriet.
above.
I have a question for John, it's just really curiosity. So there's the physical aspect, which is intense. So is it harder to do it at the end of Yom Kippur if you're fasting? Is it harder physically? No?
The question is it hard
Is it harder to do at the end of Yom Kippur?
Is it harder to blow the shofar on Yom Kippur than on Rosh
Right.
Hashanah because it's at the
When you're
end?
spent.
When you're ready.
I mean, so it's not, but also at our congregation, because anyone who has a shofar sounds the shofar, no one really knows what you're doing anyway. I mean, just honestly, I mean, there's not that, but, so the end, the difficulty sometimes is it's one note. Like if you do a line of notes, you do a tekiah, sharim, okay, you have a tekiah, you have something to warm up. Here you have you got to start and you only have one note in one chance. So that makes it more difficult. But as far as,
And also, on
Not
the
being-
end, it's the end of a 26-hour fast.
yeah,
Right.
that is not,
Just at the end,
Right.
That's it.
Right.
that has not been
Yeah.
an issue. No.
And I'm curious, and then we'll get to this Ibn Ezra though, but on this conversation, John, I'm curious because I've just thought about, you asked the question, Harriet, how you said you were talking about on 9/11 or after 9/11, how you were nervous and you were probably very much in your head and you really wanted to be good and it didn't go so well. And I'm just curious what that pressure maybe looked like then, but looks like every year. And like how that impacts your shofar execution. And again, it ties in, and we'll get to the Ibn Ezra, but I am curious about that from the source.
So first, this new shofar, I don't have any anxiety about whether a sound's going to come out. I actually have, knock on wood, it's not an issue with this shofar. The other shofar, and I haven't sounded that yet, sometimes if you're holding your lips a little too tight or something, and when you hold your lips tighter, like when you're more anxious or more nervous, you feel more pressure, right? That makes it more difficult. So it's like to be aware and relaxed. Sometimes, so maybe for the next one I'll sound this one. Hopefully something will come out.
Yeah.
But, yeah, with the newer shofar, it's really has not,
Interesting.
knock on wood.
Yeah.
One other thing,
Yeah, Stephen.
the shofar, for us that play horn instruments,
Mhm.
trumpets, tubas, trombone, the shofar is an amplifier.
Mm.
You're really, the only thing you're doing is vibrating your lips and pushing the air through it.
Mhm.
The horn is the amplifier.
Right.
Which ties into a lot of what we're reading here, that they wanted something to amplify God's voice, something to amplify the sound. That's what the shofar is. It's really just an amplifier, and you're the one sending out, the vibration through it to make the sound.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's really quite fascinating. You can take a small shofar, make a loud sound. You can take a loud, long, big ram's horn, and make a very soft sound.
Uh-huh.
It's all in how it's amplified to the congregation and your audience.
Yeah, thank you.
It's right in keeping with what you're reading here.
Right.
That, the sound of God is being amplified.
Stephen, I love that, yeah. The sound of God is being amplified. Well, and I'll get to it here. I was asking because in some ways, if we're really zoning in on this text, if the shofar is either modeling or not even modeling, but bringing the God's answer into our sanctuary and into our lives, there's a lot of pressure on the one who blows the shofar. Not to put more pressure on you this year. I don't want to mess with your all of that. But so that's why I was curious what the experience is like as this executor of sound, amplifier of sound, and also this, like you're like a messenger of sort. Maybe you're like the malach, like who kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, it has sometimes it has increased the pressure. That was after 9/11.
Right.
Right. I felt, I definitely felt that pressure of like helping bring the congregation together.
Right. Yeah. But maybe there's a Torah in that too much pressure on it is actually not what brings about this divine sound. Harry, we'll go to you and then we'll go to
I never really thought about this before, but so here in Exodus, this shofar is being on outside. And here we are today in this small room, very close to you, with low ceiling. The sound is extraordinary. And then sometimes you're at SKSA or at jazz or in the sanctuary, every one of those places has a different quality of instrument. And so God's voice sounds different depending on where you're standing.
And with shofar, because every shofar sounds different.
Every shofar is different, Harry. It's God's voice sounds different.
Every Baal Tekiyah is different. Every shofar is different. Yes.
Yeah.
But this is a great place to do it.
In here. So let's go on to the Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra is one of our most well-known commentators and medieval commentator. And I'd love to see what Ibn Ezra says that can maybe add something to this for us. So I'll just read. And when the voice of the horn waxed louder and louder, is what this is referring to, even though it's all weaved in here. Moses spoke. The idea Moses spoke, which is in our text, is to be explained by connecting it to the voice of the horn, the shofar. Moses' soul cleaved unto God. Hence he was able to speak to God. Moses spoke with God from the foot of the mountain and asked something of God. However, Scripture does not reveal what Moses asked. God answered Moses with a voice audible to Moses. And here, this is Ibn Ezra's take, with a voice audible only to Moses. The sound of the shofar, although very loud, did not prevent Moses from hearing that voice. Because of this, that is, because Moses was at the foot of the mountain. Scripture states afterwards, and the Lord called Moses with the sound of a voice and told him to ascend the mountain where the glory of God was. So God goes up. So this is interesting. This is different, I think, than what we've been talking about, how maybe God is in the shofar. What is this saying? Even Ezra's take. Put it in conversation with what we have. Any thoughts? Yeah.
I feel like in connection with what we were just saying about different shofars, different rooms, it's saying each, with a voice audible only to Moses, the sound of the shofar, although very loud, did not prevent Moses from hearing the voice. We all hear our own God's voice. We each hear our own unique God's voice, whatever we're meant to hear uniquely.
Thank you. So now we're maybe fine-tuning what, according to Ibn Ezra, fine-tuning that. Sure, you could think of that blare as God speaking, but maybe there's something about the blast, the noise of the shofar, is how we're each able to hear something unique. Like that sound opens us up, maybe, to have our own answer in our own unique voice. Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, it's kind of like your parents yelling at you. It's very loud, but you get the message. Here, God's voice is very loud and blaring, and Moses got the message.
Yeah. So the voice, you're right, thank you, Stephen. So the voice, the loud yelling, was then what? Because Moses was there. How about that? Moses was at the foot of the mountain, as it says. Moses was ready to listen and hear it in a different way. And so the loudness, okay, Moses is like, now I can go up and hear what I'm supposed to hear. So maybe this is adding another layer that maybe the shofar is opening us a window up for us on Rosh Hashanah that, okay, it sounds, we're not supposed to, and Stephen, they're making the sounds happen for us, but that's really just calling us, maybe, to then go up the mountain, spiritual mountain on our own. What else? I also brought in from the Unatana Tokef, which is part of Musaf. It's one of kind of the core prayers and theological statements of the Yamim Noraim. And this text just pulling out a pasuk from the Unatana Tokef. Uva shofar gadol yitaka, the kol demama daka yishama. And the great shofar is sounded, and a thin, silent voice shall be heard. It kind of reminds me of what you're saying. I think I'm finding why I chose this text and why I'm feeling alive by this text. The first text is complex, and it's about us and who we are and how we're walking into the space and what we maybe desire. But then this is like, okay, when this is being blown, maybe this is a way we can access the divine. It's not through the voice. It's because the voice and us being there ready to listen, we're then allowed to go up. And we're allowed to we're maybe able to hear this kol demama daka, this like thin, small, quiet voice.
It's interesting because the way it's presented in Shul, when the time took it, it's such a compelling prayer, the way it's sung in part, also the ordinary congregation. Interesting, you pick this in combination of the two. Is that another layer to the sound of the shofar?
Steve, I appreciate that. There's a layer that this here there's a tension. This line that Unatan Tokef is talking about the kol demama daka, the thin, small, quiet voice. And yet this is one of the most like, the drums are going and the cello is going and it's like, the text is like, you might die next year, like, well, this is intense. And then maybe the shofar is coming, it's being blown all around this part of the service. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, like, maybe this is actually what it's opening us up to go up the mountain. Maybe we'll hear another blast, and then we'll sit with that, and then we'll conclude our session together.
I'm going to stick with the same one. Some anxiety with the other
Uh-oh,
one.
I didn't mean to scare you now.
We'll try. So imagine you're at the Revelation. Imagine you're at the base of Sinai with hundreds of thousands, through thousands of years. And just imagine when you hear the shofar, like how you connect with all those generations and all those people through all those years.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when you're not sounding the shofar, you're sitting in shul and you hear it. You hear it the same way you play it, or do you hear something different?
Do I hear it differently when I'm playing it than when I hear it? Yes, I'm much more connected when I'm playing it than when I'm just hearing it. I'm much more in the moment and focused when I'm playing it than when I'm hearing somebody else. Honestly. Yes. How about for you?
This morning, there was two of us, Alana and Liv. She flew first and I flew back. Why Arlie did that, I think he did it with intention for us to hear one another.
Right. But you've done this for years by yourself, too.
Right, but it makes a huge difference, because when you hear it, it's like, wow, it has a different meaning when you hear it than when you're actually playing it, and you're right. You have to be in the moment to really do it the right way. And that's what I think.
And I think it's much harder to be in the moment when you're not actively doing something. For me.
Thank you. It's good to have two folks here who can share this inside information. Yeah.
They do it at Yom Kippur at the end.
When doing a long call, nothing else exists other than the sound. I don't see anything. I just hear the sound of my clothes. And I have no conscious thoughts. And I just know automatically that I'm going to stop when my breathing makes me stop. It lets me know just before.
Well, we're going to end with the Tekiah Gedolah.
But when I stop, then I'm not even sure I was in this room before. It's a moment of just an out-of-body experience. The concentration has been so intense into this one point, which is the sound, and it's the sound response after the sounding that sort of picks me up and locates me, basically.
Beautiful.
I am.
Thank you, Harry. That's a good segue into just to conclude. We're going to take the last few minutes. I just invite you, we started with the question of where are you in this moment when you hear the shofar. Now we've just had an hour and 40 minutes where we've layered all sorts of things on. We've heard from from the source, folks who are actually blowing the shofar in our community. We've looked at texts of where this whole idea for the shofar might come from, what the shofar has brought or has the power to bring in our texts, from Revelation to the Akedah, the two most seminal moments of Torah. And so now if you'd feel comfortable sharing, with all of this learning and all this discussion, what is your kavanah? What is your intention for heading into Elul, where we sound the shofar every day, and then Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? What is your intention?
At this moment, it can change.
Yes, it can change.
I don't know if I'm going to answer your question. One thing I've been thinking, putting a lot of metaphor into the device, the ram's horn, the shofar, and then the sound that it makes, and a lot of what it means, what is the voice, where does it come from? But, I mean, it's a lot of metaphor. It's just a device. There has to be a blower, right? It all comes from someone, from Jonathan, from Stephen. Right? There's someone behind who's making that sound. And I think that was said, it's an amplifier. But this metaphor, the ram's horn isn't just the metaphor. It's the human being behind it that's kind of making that all work. And so, I don't know, I'm just thinking about all the sort of the meaning that we're putting into it. We're the ones making the meaning. We're the ones who are deciding that this is the way to redeem or atone. It's a decision that we're making as a congregation. I don't know, it's a thought that I've been thinking. Thank you.
And you have to have a blower who has the intent, right? A recording doesn't count. There's a whole teaching about whether you hear it in a pit, right? Whether that counts, and so you have to have an active blower. So we now say it's okay on Zoom and live stream because we have to, but you may remember on Rosh Hashanah 2020, like I was on Broadway, sounding the shofar.
I remember,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So I thought that was interesting in Exodus. It doesn't say who's blowing the shofar. It's just the sound, right? It's like who's making the sound.
Beautiful. Thank you. Any other?
I think for me, I never have thought of the shofar or the sound of the shofar as God's voice. I always thought of it as a call. And so I think I'm going to carry that with me.
Beautiful, Harry. Thank you. Anyone else? You can pass the microphone around. If you don't want to share, just pass it along. No force sharing.
Well, I feel a little more enlightened by this whole discussion, and I'm really grateful for that. And I think at this moment, my intention is simply to be open.
And my intention is to be present. Like, there is this, I mean, having heard the shofar this morning and heard it, I guess hearing it last night on Zoom as well, but in the Havara, it really, like I heard it as a wake-up call, and it has so many different meanings. Like, it's like, why not at other times of the year we focus on this? There's the new year, it's a new month. And to be present and to hear others and hear myself.
Well, I said enough about other things. I'm just going to practice for the month of Elul so that I haven't really played in a couple of years. And so that by the time we get to the holidays, I will have internalized it, and then when I hear it in service, I could float on that.
In the back, do you want to share? Okay. I'll just add, maybe, do you have a covenant you want to share? No, you shared a lot of yours.
I shared already.
I'm just really sitting with this idea of even with all the kind of loudness and the grandeur of the holidays, finding a way to let that lead to my kol demama daka, my thin, small, quiet quiet voice, just maybe the voice of God. Okay, so we're gonna just sing to close. So if you turn to the last page of the source sheet, we have the pasuk from Psalm 27, which we say every day during the month of Elul. So we're gonna sing this together, and then we'll sing it in Hebrew, and then after we conclude, then maybe we'll all rise. Should we rise?
Sure.
We'll all rise, and then John will give us the final.
I'm going to give you a brief kavanah for the Tekiah Gedolah.
Oh. Well, maybe do it first.
I can do it
and
first?
Then we'll,
Okay, that's
then we'll
fine.
sing,
That's
and
fine.
then we'll go
And
right into that.
Some of you may have heard this before. Because for me, the Tekiah Gedolah has been the sound of impermanence. Because, as I sort of alluded to, when I'm doing this like with all my soul and all my strength and all my breath. And my one intention is that it never end, that this goes on forever. And I know, like everything else in our lives, it won't. And it's totally outside of my control. It could be long, for any of you who's born short. It could be long, it could be short, right? It could be wavering, it could be strong, but once it starts, it's not really under my control. But what I'd like you to do when you listen, unlike what I usually do when I listen to somebody's Tekiah Gedolah, is look at my watch and try to count how long it is. What I want you to do is listen and be with me in my struggle to try to keep this going as long as I can. And you will hear the wavering, and you will hear the struggle, and I ask you to be with me during that.
Achat shalti meit Adonai otav akesh. Achat shalti meit Adonai otav akesh. Shivti b'veit Adonai kol yamei chayai. Lachazot b'noam Adonai ulvaker b'chalo. Lachazot b'noam Adonai ulvaker b'chalo. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, John. I hope we have a beautiful Elul. We'll see you very soon.
My heart is pounding.
I'm sure it is. Whoa. Oh, it's long.